Короче, суджи взяли, пидоры нахуй вываливаются, блядь, сказали не трогать нахуй. Пусть типа по полям аккуратно выходят они. Ну там их 1008-10, блядь. Я, блядь, просто охуеваю с этой войны опять, блядь. Денежная хуйня, блядь. Мы везде их достаем, нахуй, можем долбить, нахуй, как долбилку, блядь. И градами, и дронами, нахуй. А говорят, нахуй, не стреляйте, пусть выходят. Сваливают себе. Охуеть.
The 7th-month battle for Kursk ends in defeat for the Ukrainian armed forces, writes a pro-Ukrainian media source. As often happened in the last 2 years of the war, Ukrainian troops retreated under the threat of encirclement, apparently later than they should have. They had to leave some of their equipment behind, and many soldiers were killed or captured. However, it still remains unclear whether the main forces of the armed forces of Ukraine managed to avoid encirclement. New information, however, which I will reveal at the end of this video, sheds some light on that mystery. From a political point of view, the invasion of the Kursk region did not bring any advantages to Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly stated that the purpose of occupying part of the region was to subsequently exchange it for Ukrainian territory. Now, Kiev has nothing left to change. Even the pro-Ukrainian analysts in the West, such as retired British officer Richard Kemp, whose tone had to take a drastic change from August 2024 when the Kursk invasion started, compared to today. Now, instead of opening his article calling the Kursk invasion an audacious armored assault, it now begins with these words. Putin, he says, in quotations, has the whip in hand, and one of the strategic objectives of the Kursk offensive, that is, gaining a bargaining chip for future peace negotiations, could never realistically have paid off. General Alexander Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Army, now knows that, which is why in recent days he has been talking about preserving as many of his soldiers' lives as possible, rather than fighting to hold his ground. From a military point of view, it is more difficult to assess the results of the battle. The Ukrainian armed forces tied down some Russian troops at their bridgehead for 7 months, but they also deployed their most combat-ready brigades near Suja. And these forces could have been used more effectively if they had left the bridgehead immediately after the start of the Russian counteroffensive in the Kursk region in the fall of 2024. So today's video is an aftermath overview of the defeat of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region. I will examine questions such as, what was the purpose of Ukraine's Kursk invasion, the real purpose? Was it achieved as they claim? Did it offer any respite to Ukraine in tying up Russian troops? And lastly, are there still Ukrainian troops trapped there, and what is their likely outcome? Now, the research for this video was painstaking and detailed, and as this channel is still being introduced into the YouTube algorithm, its reach is still limited. So I ask you to support with super thanks or PayPal donations if you enjoyed this video. And most of all, consider joining the channel membership for exclusive analysis, rare combat footage, and breaking news published every day. So shout out to my newest channel members here, and stick around to the end for some bonus footage and a membership trailer video in the end screen. In fact, make sure to watch my 4-part playlist on the Russian Operation Potok, or Flow, via the gas pipelines to liberate Suja in the end screen. Now let's get into it. Back in 2022, a strange situation developed on the front. It was clearly divided into 2 parts of almost equal length. Active from the northeast of the Kharkov region to the mouth of the Dnieper, where the majority of troops were concentrated, and both armies exchanged attacks and blows. Passive from the junction of the borders of Ukraine, Belarus and Poland to Kharkov, along the Belarusian, Ukrainian and Russian-Ukrainian borders. Both sides carried out raids across the border. The Russian armed forces with GRU Special Forces groups the Ukrainian armed forces with larger units subordinate to the main intelligence directorate. The latter even managed to capture settlements near the border, but only in order to quickly retreat to Ukrainian territory. The idea that the weakly covered areas of the passive front could be used for strikes with large forces at great depth came first to the Russian command. In early May of 2024, it organized an operation north of Kharkov. The border was crossed by forces, tens of thousands of servicemen of the Leningrad military district, reinforced by newly formed units. They managed to advance several kilometers into Ukrainian territory and occupy part of the city of Volchansk. The offensive was stopped by the Ukrainian Armed Forces reserves, but arrived around the fifth day. Russian war correspondents then wrote that the purpose of the offensive was precisely to distract Ukrainian reserves from the main direction of a Russian armed forces strike in the center of Donbass. Probably, the Ukrainian command was already planning its operation with a strike across the border in May. On August 6, the invasion began, and at first it was successful. The Ukrainian armed forces were able to enter Russian territory by 20 to 30 kilometers and occupy the regional center of Sudzha. The Ukrainian Armed Forces Command achieved operational surprise, convincingly justifying the concentration of troops at the border by the need to strengthen the defense in case of a new offensive by the Russian armed forces on Sumy. The main forces of the operation were transferred at the last moment before it started. At first, the need for the invasion was justified by Kiev on a purely military basis. The version about the operation for the defense of Sumy region and the cessation of shelling on Sumy city, aka the creation of a buffer zone, was quickly forgotten. The attacks on Sumy only intensified.
Это получается трофейного вооружения.
Then the main idea became the distraction of Russian troops from the direction of the main attack of the Russian armed forces in the summer offensive in the south and center of Donbass. However, by that time, the Russian command had large reserves in different areas. Only one unit was transferred from the front around Donetsk to Kursk Oblast, that is, the 155th Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet. Before that, it operated in the Ugledar area. However, the transfer of the brigade began even before the Ukrainian armed forces invaded Kursk Oblast. The original destination of this maneuver, however, is unknown. One way or another, Ugledar was captured by the Russian armed forces without the participation of the 155th Brigade. Otherwise, the donors for the creation of the Kursk group were calmer directions. The main part of the forces was transferred from Kharkov and Volchansk, the rest from the Dnieper line in the Kherson region. The 106th Airborne Division was removed from the front from the north of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian armed forces also assembled a group of approximately 15 brigades, including the most combat-ready ones, to continue their offensive in the Kursk region. Interestingly, the 47th Mechanized Brigade, armed with Abrams tanks and Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, was sent to Sudzha from the front line south of Kursk in central Donbass. The Ukrainian armed forces were unable to develop an offensive deep into the Kursk region. After the Ukrainian army failed to occupy the regional center of Koronevo and break through to the Rilsk-Logov road in the Russian rear, it was forced to go on the defensive. Then Kiev gave new reasons for continuing the operation, this time purely political. The main one was the desire officially voiced by Volodymyr Zelensky to exchange territories in the Kursk region for part of the Ukrainian regions occupied by Russia. In this sense, Ukraine suffered an absolute defeat. Now it, and probably only temporarily, controls a bridgehead half as small as the territory captured by the Russian armed forces near Volchansk alone. Now what would have happened if Russia had sent the reserves it dedicated to Kursk to the Donbass instead, asks many military observers. Last year's plans of the Russian command regarding the use of the reserves are unknown. Perhaps the Ukrainian armed forces, having launched an offensive on Kursk, really did disrupt some important operation of the Russian armed forces. However, in general, the decision to send large forces of the Ukrainian army to a passive section of the front and then leave them there after the start of a counteroffensive of the Russian armed forces in October of 2024 had a negative impact on the situation on the fronts. At the decisive moment of the Russian offensive in the south of Donbass, the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command had no reserves. As a result, the fortresses of Ugledar, Jurakove, and Velika Novoselka were lost, as well as a vast territory between the western outskirts of Donetsk and the Kursk-Velika Novoselka line with dozens of settlements. Russian troops also advanced in auxiliary directions. They reached the western outskirts of Kursk and the border of the Dnepropetrovsk region, crossed the Oskil River near Kupiansk, occupied part of the Toretsk and Chasiv fortresses north of Donetsk. Now all these territorial losses are not compensated by acquisitions in the Kursk region. Thanks to successful breakthroughs in the summer and autumn, Russian troops retained the initiative in the south of Donbass. Only by February 2025 did the Ukrainian armed forces manage to gather forces to stop the offensive of the Russian armed forces on the Pokrovsk-Toretsk line with counterattacks. But the Russian army is completing the regrouping of forces from the southern part of the front of Pokrovsk and Toretsk and may soon resume this offensive.
Смотрите, здесь растяжка, аккуратно.
It will be difficult for the Ukrainian armed forces to effectively use the units freed up after the defeat of Sudzha. Firstly, they suffered heavy losses, especially in the last stage of the poorly organized retreat. Secondly, there is a threat of the Russian armed forces continuing their offensive in Sumy Oblast. It is not known whether they will take advantage of it. Putin publicly called on the Russian command to, and I quote, think about creating a buffer zone in Sumy Oblast. But this could also be an element of the game to deceive the Ukrainian enemy, writes Baduza. The Russian command has reserves that were formally withdrawn from the front to participate in the Battle of Kursk, but did not take a noticeable part in it. Thus, the 76th Airborne Division was transferred from the Kherson region to the border, but its units did not take part in the offensive on Sudzha. Thus, the Russian army holds the initiative, has reserves, and can choose the location of the next attack. As a result of the Kursk operation, the active front line was extended, which in itself works against the Ukrainian armed forces, which suffer from a shortage of personnel and units ready for combat. Their opponent experiences the extension of the front easier, since Russia has a numerical advantage.
Нет. Самое главное привести его в чувство.
Выставка это получается...
Now, as I mentioned earlier, the situation of the units of the armed forces of Ukraine trapped in Kursk remains unclear. Many ask the question, have they been able to successfully withdraw, or are they surrounded?
Хотел бы сказать, что мы ознакомились с сегодняшним обращением президента США господина Трампа пощадить жизни военнослужащих украинской армии.
President Trump's recent request via his Truth Social post states clearly that many Ukrainian soldiers are trapped as he begs Putin to allow them safe passage out of Kursk. In return, Russian President Vladimir Putin offered to allow Ukrainian forces trapped in Kursk to surrender. But RT News now warns that, though Putin's offer is still valid, time is running out.
Совершили в зоне вторжения многочисленные.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov had said, in quotations, "It is still in effect," he said on Saturday in response to a question from a TASS news agency. "Their time is shrinking like the shagreen skin," he added, in reference to a novel called The Magic Skin. On Friday, Putin guaranteed merciful treatment to Ukrainian fighters encircled in Kursk region if they surrender. In quotations, "If they lay down their arms and surrender, we will guarantee them their lives and dignified treatment in accordance with international law and Russian legal norms," the president said. He indicated, however, that Kiev should order them to do so. Putin's statement was a response to US President Donald Trump's call to spare the lives of thousands of Ukrainian troops who are completely surrounded by the Russian military. "This would be a horrible massacre, one not seen since World War II," he commented on Truth Social. As of Wednesday, 86% of the land occupied by Ukraine was reclaimed, according to General Valery Gerasimov, the head of the Russian General Staff. He noted that the remaining Ukrainian units in the area are largely encircled and isolated. Lastly, according to a Ukrainian reserve colonel, we have a figure for the amount of Ukrainian troops trapped in Sudzha.
Чи можемо ми назвати кількість?
Reserve Colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Sergei Rabsky, revealed the number of Ukrainian military personnel currently in the Kursk region. apparently in a video published by the Telegram channel Operation Z, War Correspondents of the Russian Spring. As Grabsky said, there are currently up to 7,000 Ukrainian military personnel in the Kursk region.
Вибачте, номер баги або там.
Ползайте туда! Давайте, пацаны! Сдаешься? Голову!
В ответ лишь свистят пули, враг бьет из гранатомета. Автомат поврежден, командир не может стрелять.
У меня, братан, автомат прострелил.
Но есть гранаты.
Ложись все. Сейчас я кину.